Morning and welcome to Sales TV. It's a glorious day where I am in North London. I hope it's a glorious day wherever you are. Over to our co-host, the bearded sales guy. How are you this morning?
I'm very well, Andy. Very well. It's glorious outside. I can hear the birds singing. It almost feels like spring, and we're approaching the end of March.
Spring has definitely sprung, hasn't it? Which is pretty cool. Which
Yeah.
is pretty cool indeed. So, what we're going to talk about today?
Well, I think we're talking about all sellers are not equal, which is a really important topic. But I'm sure you've got a different title for it.
Yeah, it came out of the concept really that a lot of the work that I'm doing for my own doctorate is very much around looking at how salespeople learn.
Yeah.
And what has come out of it is really looking at adult learning theory and cognitive learning theory. And what's fascinating about it is there's a really base, simple concept around learning for adults. And yet it's a bit like that line in Jack Sparrow and what's the film he's in? Pirates of the
Pirates
Caribbean.
of the Caribbean. Yeah.
Yeah, when he talks about the opportune moment and he likes to wave at them as they go by, and I think as a world of sales, what we've managed to do is wave at the opportune moment of understanding how salespeople learn as it passes us by, because it's really one core concept, right, Alex, which is people learn best through choice.
Yeah.
But in sales, we don't tend to give people the opportunity to learn by having a choice. It's normally dictated to them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And especially as I think about how vast the spectrum is in terms of learning ability and the various nuances that exist in and around learning difficulties like neurodiversity and conditions like ADHD. Yeah, I mean, if I look at myself, I left school at 16. I hated school. I hated being forced to learn things that didn't float my boat. And it's later on in life, when I chose to embrace, whatever it was, Keith Eades and an emotional selling or the Challenger sale, because it really meant something to me. And when it means something to you, you're willing to really open your mind and spend the time required to imprint that new thing, that new skill to your mind, to your memory banks.
Yeah, you are. And what's fascinating about it is once you look at giving people choice, which is really scary. I mean, I've had a few conversations with corporates who've got 400 or 500 salespeople. And you say, well, actually, if you give people choice, they'll learn in a far more constructive way. They'll actually own their own learning, which is called self-directed learning.
But will they?
Actually, yeah, they do. There's a paper there's quite a few papers that have been written about it. So there's one by Artis and Harris. They wrote it in 2007, and they actually identified that actually salespeople are, in theory, the best people at owning their own learning because they're task orientated, they're goal minded, they're regulated in what they do, i.e., they keep themselves on track in the main, and consequently, they will be best at doing and owning their own learning. Now, the real kind of challenge then is we just don't let them do that. So, what happens is normally it's a corporate issue. And the corporate issue is, let's just use it, margins are down. So margins are down. Nobody really investigates and goes, well, is it a competitive thing? And therefore we can't really do anything about it. Or we just have to accept that in our product maturity cycle. What happens is that they go, well, all the salespeople can't negotiate because obviously they're just giving away margin. How do you know? And there's a couple of processes you can go through. You could truly go in and do a win-loss exercise to understand what is happening as to why you win and why you lose.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it price. But if you then say, well, okay, we're finance and what we want is a solution to this problem, actually you go out and write a brief, and the brief says, we need someone to come in and do negotiation skills training.
Yeah. How much of that is the manager and not the sales rep? The sales they're doing, but the manager just wants to drop the price to get the deal in the quarter.
Yeah. So the reality then comes down is everyone has to go in. Now, what Artis and Harris did is they looked at, and we'll share this on the channel later, but they looked at then identifying 4 types of learners in sales. And they therefore broke down that, yes, if you have a choice, that's great. However, now you have to look at what type of salesperson they are in terms of learner. So they've got the first one, which is called induced. And think about that in terms of, you just mentioned it, you left school, and fundamentally you go into an environment where you have almost a tutor, you have high scaffolding, there's a lot of support around you, and you get given stuff almost as if it was a school environment, because people are comfortable with that. A perfect example of that is an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship in sales is a perfect example of how you take somebody who's just left the university or school and put them into an induced environment.
Yeah.
And that works really, really well. They get coached from their manager. They get coached from a recognized professional tutor. There's a curriculum. There's a certification at the end of it. It codifies how they learn, and it's brilliant.
So on that topic around apprenticeships, and I know there's 4 types you're going to talk us through. Maybe we can come back to this point. But the one issue I have around the apprenticeships is the government enforcing that salespeople need to have an A to C equivalent in maths and English.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen in the next parliament is you'll see there is a requirement for people to be able to do basic maths and basic English, but how does the pot of money get more sensibly used? It won't necessarily just be an apprenticeship. It could be off-qual generated qualifications, which would remove that at the front. But you are right. I mean, we are looking, the ISP is looking at reigniting the Trailblazer. So anyone watching who wants to sit on that Trailblazer for level 4 and 6 and 5 and so on, let Dan Hodgetts at the ISP know. Because actually you're spot on right. Someone came to me and said, well, actually the endpoint assessment. So it's not only the maths and English requirement, but it's also the endpoint assessment, which is written, which doesn't really help those people with dyslexia. It puts pressure on them. So there is a tendency now to do more of a verbal viva, which helps out those things. So I think it's getting better and recognizing in that area some of the challenges that people have and how we get that resolved and sorted.
Yeah.
The next set of learners are really fascinating, and they're called synergists, or it's a synergistic way of learning. And what happens there really is they've got a bit more knowledge. They're still not there in terms of all of the stuff that they need to know. So you've still got to give them structure, but you have to introduce more choice. So a great example would be, here's 10 things that we believe every salesperson in our organization needs to know. And as a consequence of that, you pick the 5 that you think are most important to you in your skills enhancement to do first. It's your choice. So the sequencing of how you learn those things is completely down to you. But you do need to know these 10 things.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So, it's a little less classroom. It'll be blended learning. It'll be digital. It could be a bit classroom. It would certainly be maybe team-based, doing things sort of like after work on, we used to do, sessions sort of like, on training on Tuesdays when I was at EMC. And those are things, different ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
But then you move on to people who've been selling 10 years. and they are basically voluntaristic, and they react really badly to classrooms. It's
Right.
not the environment they're in. And an example of that was fascinating last week at Cranfield. That I was talking to somebody, and we've got 4 tables of 4 in this session.
Yeah.
And over lunch, one of the guys said, "This is the first time I've been in a classroom in 30 years." And it was like, yeah. And if we're not careful, what's happening there is you're freighting knowledge. You're not giving them an experience. You're not giving them the ability to talk, discuss. You're not giving them workshops. You're not making it real.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating around that is they learn in a very different way. And what they're looking for is individual development plans. They're looking for every 6 to 7 weeks to sit down with their manager and have a one-on-one to be reflective. What worked, what didn't work, what would you do again, what wouldn't you do, how would you accelerate some of that learning. You've got this specific thing that you've put your finger on, so account planning or social media use.
Yeah.
Okay, here's 6 or 7 hours worth of content around that. Go away, have a look at that, talk to somebody, and then come back and we'll see how it gets applied. And what's fascinating around that is there's a lot of people in that space in sales, who've been selling, but we just ignore them and go, actually, no. When we, again, back to the classroom, we'll force you into a classroom, we'll force you into an event. And yes, we'll try and make it a bit of a rah-rah for a morale boosting because we'll get everyone together. But actually, within 90 days, they've forgotten 90% of what was going on in that room.
Yeah.
And then the last piece is scanners. So you've got these really interesting people who are really at the top of their perceived game, and we'll come back to the word perceived in a minute. They're looking for a network. They want to sit down with people that look a lot like them, not necessarily the same industry, but look a lot like them in terms of the people that they sell to. And they are looking for ratified materials that they can pull down in an instant, that fundamentally normally is there for situational disruption. So something's come along, changed their world. And the reality around that is that, they like also being stamped as, I'm a fellow, I am at the top of my game. I've been certified. I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when you start to have conversations with people in sales organizations and say, if you've only got 30 people, because it's more manageable, I suppose you can start to put names against those 4 descriptors.
Mm.
And the people go, yeah, you're right, I can. Okay, so now you put names against them, you can start to have 4 different types of learning environment and 4 tracks of how you support your people.
Yeah.
What they're learning, as in they could be learning social selling, they could be learning negotiation skills, they could be learning prospecting, they could be doing anything within the curriculum, but they're learning it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and you would do I think your point is that you would do that because then it's efficient, it's easily managed by an organization to talk to each group as if they were unique.
Yeah, and the other kind of complicating factor, and so what is this? If companies don't start to think about this, what they're doing is they're effectively wasting training effort. 90% goes in 90 days. But the other thing to think about is that it takes 10 years for any professional to get to journey person status. 10 years.
Okay, tell me what journey person status is.
Someone competent at their job.
Okay.
Competent. It
So
takes
not 10,000 hours, but 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of the same. There will be clearly 10,000 hours or a number of hours in there. So
Yeah.
spot on. But what it is that you've actually got people who are learning everything that they need to know to be completely rounded and grounded in their sphere of expertise. So a doctor takes 10 years to get to a state of competence.
Yeah.
People would go, well, yeah, as a doctor, it doesn't count for anything else. Well, clearly it does. If you're an engineer, yes, you've got 2 years worth of learning to do your engineering, as in a car mechanic engineer, might be an apprenticeship. But then there's another 3 or 4 years where you're gaining experience and further qualifications till you're where you're a competent engineer, where anyone can throw you pretty much any engine and go, there's a problem there, and you'll be able to define it, what the problem is, and fix it.
Yeah. And I think I know the answer to my next question, but I'm gonna ask you it because I'd love to hear your view. Why does it take so long?
Because, and it came out in a paper called Learning in Action. It wasn't specifically at sales. In fact, it looked at 29 professions and sales wasn't in it. And it takes so long because things are not straightforward. If you think about being a doctor, you spend 5 years at university and you come out a generalist. You either go and become a GP, general practitioner, or you go into hospital and you are, a house person, house doctor, and then over time you get into a specialism. It takes, as I say, 20 years to, obviously in that context, to be a completely rounded specialist in ear, nose and throat or whatever. An accountant, though, accountants study for 3-4 years to get to a point where they just can actually do an audit. They can sign stuff off. But then they have to go through more and more development because there's more complexity as they potentially get a broader canvas of customers. It's one thing to do something for a UK-based company that doesn't trade anywhere else around the world. But if you've got a UK-based multinational, all of a sudden you've probably got 10, 15 years worth of development of understanding all the different accounting practices, all of the things that need to happen before you can help that organization consolidate their accounts down and then sign them off.
Yeah, and I guess it's there's that journey of acquiring the knowledge, but then there's that journey of applying that knowledge in different situations, different scenarios, and then learning from what, and then refining your approach.
And that in itself is a real challenge because, what we do in sales, let's be really brutally honest about it, is we try and get everybody up to speed to be able to do the number in 6 months. And that's what we define as competent. We don't define somebody's skills and say they're competent against all these skills because that would take too long. What we do is we say they're competent to hit a number and the evidence is they've hit the number. And you kind of go, well, that's one way of looking at it, absolutely. But then if you think about people moving in their career, somebody goes as a doctor from one hospital or an accountant from one practice to the other. They take all of that learning with them and they continue to develop themselves. In sales, somebody goes from one company to the other. There's an implied knowledge capability. There's an implied skill. But the new employer doesn't know what it is. So it's just an interview that is basically saying, yeah, you've been able to demonstrate through, exampling questions and answers that you can do this. But the moment they're through the door, the same process of getting them up to speed to hit the number in 6 months happens again. So all we do in sales is concentrate on the first 6 months of people's journey.
Yeah.
What we don't do is go, you know what, you've been learning for 4 years, you've done an apprenticeship, you've done the now how do we help you go to the next stage?
One of my biggest frustrations is seeing salespeople, good salespeople, hired because they were good and then sheep dipped in the way that company does things, and then that company wonders why they're not performing in the same way because they're forced to work the way they worked before.
And it's fascinating because the bit that is really it leads on to next week. So next week we're going to have Dale. We're going to start launching Sales TV Sports, and start to look at how sports can teach sales and sales leadership, and vice versa.
Yeah.
What you just said there, let's just take the context of rugby. For a long time, England have picked somebody on their club form and then tried to make them conform to the national way of playing. As in, I need you to fit into this system. Well, actually, why would you do that? Because you picked them because they were great as a fullback. So let them be great as that fullback. And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? We sheep dip everybody. We want them to conform to a certain way.
Yeah. Have you seen the film American Symphony?
No, I haven't.
What's his name? Johnson. Anyway, this brilliant musician decides to create the American Symphony, which is made up of a number of top musicians from different sort of genres like jazz and orchestra and brass instruments, and he's on the piano, and he tries to create this amazing piece of music. And the reality is everybody was brilliant in their own right, but the end result wasn't that great, I have to say. I expected this music that would just kind of inspire me and fill me with goosebumps, and it didn't. And I feel like the organization is trying to ensure that when played, the music is perfect to the one listener,
right,
and miss the brilliance of each person in their own right. And I feel like sales is almost like the American Symphony. We need to give each musician the freedom to play their own instrument their own way, as opposed to trying to get them to conform to create this, one piece of music that might only appeal to one person.
Yeah, and that's fascinating again in its own right, isn't it? Is because we don't want anarchy, and that's what we fear. So somebody said to me, well, if we don't have a process and we don't have a platform, then fundamentally, we're just going to have every seller having their own forecasting methodology, every seller using their own spreadsheet. Therefore, we're going to force Salesforce.com onto everything, all of these things. And the reality about it is that you do need these certain things. You do need a viewpoint of, is everybody using a common language? Is everybody, so if a deal is forecast and it's committed for this quarter, what does that mean? And you can't therefore have, back to the 400 example, you can't have 400 salespeople with a slightly different view of what committed means.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's the fundamentals, like reading music, for example.
Exactly. That's really good. Yeah, back to that analogy. However,
John Batista it was. Sorry, just remembered his name.
So the viewpoint has got to therefore be that maybe, just maybe, that you can let salespeople, once they've got this common taxonomy that the company needs them to understand, go off and keep their skills up to date. Because negotiation skills, in theory, apart from understanding the margin and the product from one company to another, the concept of being a brilliant negotiator applies to every single company. The concept of great stakeholder management applies to that salesperson, whatever company they're in. But we just don't have the confidence. So we treat salespeople constantly as if we need to, accelerate them, new hire them, get them to a point where they can sell our product. And that's what competence looks like. They can hit their number. Okay, what if they were really, really competent but didn't hit their number, but there's a bunch of really logical reasons as to why they didn't hit their number?
Yeah. Now, the 4 learning styles you mentioned earlier, is that what you've created? The ISP's created? Or
no, it's not. It's written in literature. There's a really great professor, maybe we can get her on, Stephanie Boyer. And she's done some work with artists and also with Harris. So we'll put it onto the post thereafter. But it's them.
Okay.
What is interesting is that they looked at on the graph. They basically said it induced. It's more company led, but when you get to voluntaristic and scanning, that's more individual led.
Okay.
But they also looked across that and said, well, what is the contextual understanding? And really fascinatingly is if you were to measure people's contextual understanding and competence against the framework that is or the curriculum, actually we've found, and this is where the ISP has looked at it and measured about 1,000 people, everybody's had skills fade.
Skills what?
Fade. So skills have dropped off because they've just not kept the muscle memory. They've just not kept on top of, the thinking around what they need to be brilliant at.
Well, this is where AI is going to play a part, I think, in terms of that unique learning. So taking it from the 4 types, to ensuring that the style of learning is unique to the individual, but also helps that individual maintain the muscle memory.
Absolutely. But also what's really important is then codifying it. So they've reached a standard, you sign them off that they've reached that standard. So you've got a diploma or you've got a degree or you've got a micro qualification in that little bit.
Yeah.
That codifies it not only for the individual and says, great, the effort was worth it, but it also codifies it to the employer, but most importantly, to their prospects and customers.
Yeah.
And then that looks into driving another thing, which is, sales person's not only ability to develop, but also develop their own brand. And once they're developing their own brand through codification, certification, and learning, you start to tear the barriers down.
Yes.
So if we look at the guy that was on the late edition, when he was talking about the low barrier to entry for salespeople, which consequently means that fundamentally buyers put up a huge barrier to protect themselves. What if actually you have an ability to say, through my lifelong learning, this is what I am. You can view me in the same light as an engineer or an accountant or a doctor in terms of my pride in understanding what I need to do and be good.
Wow.
And consequently, people will go, actually, it's great. So I know I'm going to get ethical behavior from them. I know they're going to be customer centric because that can be measured too. So that other customers have actually ratified that they are customer centric and very much focused on solutions. Yeah, we'll let them in at 30% of the decision, not 70.
Yeah.
So it all flows through. You're learning and you're develops your personal brand, which you have to amplify on social because no one uses a business card anymore. But you amplify it on social, people will be attracted to you because they go, here's a proud person who is developing their knowledge and keeping on top of their knowledge because things will change. So obviously 6 years ago, while social selling was important and digital selling was important and hybrid selling was important, it became massively important within about a week.
Yeah.
Understanding supply chains has all of a sudden become massively important and the implication that has. So fascinating in terms of, and yes, we've had guests on that have talked about, okay, how do you, the great guy that talked about how do you get quality of steak but at the mass of a hamburger? That's
Lawrence.
Lauren, and
Lawrence.
I don't disagree with that. But once you've done that, what next?
Yeah. I'm conscious of time, Andy, and I've got Rob Durant in my ear saying 26 minutes.
26 minutes. So we literally are a little bit over, but we'll stick some stuff into the Restream channel and share some stuff. You're hosting tonight. Who've you got on tonight?
Tonight I've got Michael Hellman talking about the modern CRO.
Cool.
Yeah.
And next week we have the launch of Sports TV or Sales TV Sport with Dale, which will become a regular weekly offshoot. Then the week after, you're with Dr. Grant Van Ulrich talking about sales transformation, which in itself will become another five episodes offline. Yeah.
Yeah, hugely excited about that one. We're creating a mini series around sales transformation and the importance of, raising awareness, I think, and the importance of the individual in transforming sales approaches.
Cool. That sounds fantastic.
Cool.
Well, it's been great to chat today. Look out for the updates. We will now be publishing the episodes for the next 3 weeks, because actually we've then got Helga coming back and hosting.
Helga.
Woo! Low energy.
Passion.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been great to see everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week. And for everybody out there, because I think Easter applies all around the world,
Yeah.
have a great Easter.
Have a great Easter. Take care.